This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Beginning today's show is Ignacio Ciampitti, K-State Farming Systems Specialist and Director of Research for ID3A, as he explains the recently released website that allows farmers to have easier access to K-State's crop performance test. Jeff Whitworth, K-State crop entomologist, keeps the show rolling with an update on Pest in Kansas. He talks about green cloverworms, armyworms, army cutworms, and grasshoppers. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk ends the show as he looks at some of the trends and areas where Kansas producers might want to focus moving forward. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our show discussing a website with crop performance test data for farmers with K-State Farming Systems Specialist and Director of Research for ID3A at K-State, Ignacio Ciampitti. Ignacio, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Ignacio, before we talk about the website, can you remind us, what are these crop performance tests?
Well, that's an excellent question. I mean, if you look at not only just for K-State, but in multiple places, I mean, the crop performance tests are the unbiased, most trusted source of information about testing different varieties, hybrids, different basically genotypes, I mean, in terms of different crops across multiple locations across the state. And this has been around for the last, I would say, more than 4 decades. So if we start looking backwards, it's just a tradition of testing and looking at what are the best options in terms of multiple hybrids, varieties. So if we, for example, if we go to an example on corn, there are multiple hybrids, and depending on the location, there are some hybrids that they might be much better than others. So university, I mean, in this case, the crop performance test has been one of the trusted sort of information to look at and test the different hybrids in those different locations and really report to farmers their main findings. Mainly just what the farmers are looking is to say, I would like to see kind of a ranking and trying to understand if this hybrid or this variety is performing well in this location or how this variety compares in this location versus another location in the state. And really trying to get some information that is performed by the university, basically, I mean, really robustly trusted because the university doesn't have any business on selling varieties and advertising. And one of the main things that farmers are really trusting is on this approach on looking at just the data coming from the university and then understanding basically if the varieties that they are selecting or they want to select, they want to buy to different companies are the best varieties in terms of performance. And also looking at it on the price, on the seed. So it's as always has been one of the most trusted sources of information.
Why is it something you decided to take the time to kind of reformat how it's shared with farmers?
Well, we were looking for the last several years, and you know very well that we do all the winters our crop schools. And if you look at the corn, sorghum, soybean schools, for the last decade, you always hear that comment that farmers are always looking for university information in many situations to try to understand and to get information that is trusted and they can take decisions. Okay, and one of the big, I would say, issues on the crop performance was that the delay from the information to be on a book and printed and available. In the past, farmers were taking those decisions usually later in the season or even during the winter. As years passed by, the evolution of the decision-making changed quite a bit. So farmers, they're now taking decisions on seed for next year today. So as they are harvesting our corn and sorghum or any soybeans, any crop today, they are already buying and taking the decision of what is the variety or the hybrids that they're planning to use next year. And we knew it that we need to get something quickly. So the first step was, okay, can we get out information? Yes, we can get out any information that if we harvest a study today, we can send and put on our website the Excel file, and the Excel file is available, right? But when you have discussions with farmers, accessibility, finding the information, and then getting to that file, opening the file, finding the file, and then processing the file, all the information. In many situations, most of the farmers don't have the time, and was too complex. And if you think about, I would like to get a digestible version, you need to wait sometimes between 2 or 3 months until the final book with all the information got printed. Okay, so that was the big delay there. So, and we thought about the situation, and we start thinking, here is a possibility, and there is a gap where we can use all this amazing information and immediately get it to the fingerprints of a farmer and making sure that we digest the information for them. So we put it in a format that farmers can visualize it quickly and they can make comparisons.
How can farmers navigate within the website? What are they going to be able to find? What are all those different parameters?
The website is super simple. We try to put it as simple as possible. We even have farmers looking at the website and giving us feedback before we release our website. It's very easy to find the website, so we can discuss about how to get access to. And the website has all the information. If you look at all the crops on performance testing, so if we look at corn, soybeans, sorghum, sunflower, wheat, canola, so all the crops, where we have any information on K-State, and even data that is going all the way to 1980, okay, when you're looking at corn. Many times for farmers, that data might be not just relevant, it's more for archiving, but if you look at what they might be interested in, they might be interested to look at the last couple of years of data. And they might be interested to look at one hybrid. For example, if they select corn, they're going to find multiple years, but let's say that they want to only just look at the last year or the last 2 years, they can basically compare, like saying 2023 and 2022, and they can look at, for example, select what hybrids are available and what locations. And the main goal is that they will be able to immediately, once they start selecting the crop, the years, and the hybrid, they're going to start looking at where is the hybrid across all the state in multiple locations. And they're going to get visualizations quickly to understand basically how did that hybrid perform in multiple places. So it's a very easy to use. It's a very digestible, and everything is just at the fingerprint there in the first screen. The farmers want to be able to just to visualize and to compare multiple things.
Ignacio, who was the team who helped get this website off the ground?
That's an excellent question. We were working with the funding from Kansas Corn. That was the main funding because we discussed about the idea of trying to get this information accessible and easy to digest, quickly to farmers. And we were working with our team. From our side, we have one of our scholars, Pedro Cisbelli was one of our main guys behind the tool and then developing basically all the backbone and all the coding. And mainly we collaborated and worked together with the Digital Ag Institute, so that was part of one of our main initiatives, of many of the initiatives that we are having right now in terms of research, engagement, and education. And our main goal was to, prepare a visualization tool that kind of exemplify the way that we wanted to move forward quickly all the information that is being produced by the university. The beauty about the tool is not only just that it's a visualization tool for farmers, but also fulfills the promise that the information coming from the university, publicly funded, is information that is immediately available. So all the data that is on the tool, the farmers and anyone will have access basically to all that data at the fingerprint. And again, it took us several months to go through decades, many decades of data. But we are very proud to say that we have now one of the probably best and largest open database of crop yield, and we are one of the first on putting that information out to farmers.
Ignacio, what makes you excited for hopefully farmers getting into the website and using it?
I'm very excited about the possibility of farmers seeing that if we have a field that is currently harvested today, as soon as we get access to that Excel file, the farmers will be able to go inside of the tool and start basically looking at visualization comparison, even from data that was harvested this week. And for us, getting access to data that was harvested this week is a way that we are solving the problem of them to wait 2 or 3 months until they get access to a printed version. So that was our main goal, and then I think that we basically fulfilled that goal and more.
Ignacio, as you guys have put a lot of work into this, and we've mentioned it's from the university, just wanting to remind producers that this resource is free.
Yes, this resource is free, and it's available. All the crop performance test information that is produced by the university is open and available for all farmers across the state and then across all the country. So it's an important source of information, and we want to basically to make it even more relevant today.
Ignacio, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation again.
That was K-State Farming Systems Specialist Ignacio Ciampitti, who is also the Director of Research for ID3A, as he discussed the new website where farmers can access K-State's crop performance test. You can check out this website at avyield.com. That is AVYIELD.com. I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net as well. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about some bugs people might be seeing this time of year with K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth. Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime.
Jeff, first wanting to mention something we haven't talked about, the green cloverworms.
Yes, we haven't talked about them this year. In years past, we've talked about them way more than we like to. The green cloverworm. It's a very common pest in soybeans, in alfalfa, and in gardens in around the state of Kansas. They generally come in from the southeast. They don't overwinter in Kansas. They generally come in from the southeast. They move their way across the state, usually mid-June, July, August, and about this time of year, they become adults and they get ready to head south for overwintering. In some years, a lot of growers spray for green cloverworms because they can do a real number on defoliating soybeans. They don't really cause that much yield reduction, but it looks bad. So a lot of growers get really concerned and they get out and they treat green cloverworms. And as I said, I can usually follow the infestation level from the southeast part of the state all the way across the state over a period of a month or two in the soybeans. This year, not so much, but there have been green cloverworms. But I've been getting quite a few calls in the last week about the moths that are around. And the guys, as they're cutting, the main question the growers have, as they're harvesting their bean fields, they're seeing all these moths fly up in front of the combine, and they're wondering what kind of a moth that is and if it's going to be a problem for next year because they're out there laying eggs in those fields this year. And the ones I have seen, the majority are green cloverworms. There's some others mixed in, but the green cloverworm is the vast majority. The green cloverworm moth is, it's kind of nondescript, little brown, very aerodynamic or airplane-shaped moth. They're pretty quick to jump and fly. They usually don't fly very far. A lot of times they're attracted to windows or doors that have lights shining through them at night, so they'll accumulate around around your door, around your porch, and then when you go out in the morning, they fly out. They really don't fly very far right now, but they can be kind of annoying. But the main question the growers have is, are all these moths out there in their soybean fields laying eggs right now as they're harvesting? And I can tell you they're not. They're gearing up to go wherever they go, someplace in South America or wherever they overwinter, so they won't be back. The other question is, if they're in this soybean field this year, are they going to be there next year? Because I'm thinking about putting beans in that field next year. I can't tell you. You know, they come in from the southern overwintering sites every year, and they go wherever the wind blows them, wherever they can fly to, and that's where they, start ovipositing or depositing their eggs. So just because they're there this year doesn't mean they're going to be there next year. Next year we might not have very many just because of the environmental resistance conditions we have. What's good for them this year may not be good for them next year. That kind of thing. So right now, the answer is don't worry about them. They're not going to lay eggs in that field, and they're all gearing up to go south for overwintering purpose. Yeah, they may be a nuisance for a little while because they do get in the cab of the combine. They do get around the farmhouse. I was in producers in their yard the other day, and they came out, and man, those little moths flew all out from their porch. So they can be a nuisance, but they're not going to be an agricultural problem this year. And we'll just have to wait to see next year. There's no way of predicting what that infestation is going to be like next year.
As we are cooling down, is our concern with insects and bugs being in our fields going down?
Yes. Right now we have, two concerns. I was going to say problems. One's a problem. We've talked about armyworms and fall armyworms for the last couple of years. The fall armyworm pretty much, from what I've seen, has moved on to the southern parts of wherever they overwinter. They don't overwinter in Kansas. So right now for the most part, we don't have any fall armyworms. What we have left are armyworms. Armyworms are still out. They're still feeding in the wheat. And we're also, for the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've seen army cutworm moths come in. Army cutworm moths over summer in Colorado, up in the mountains, and then they come back into the western part of Kansas, or western 2/3 of the state, and they lay eggs in the fall. Right now, they're out laying eggs. They'll lay eggs in the soil. They lay eggs any place where there's some sort of green vegetation that the larvae can feed on when they hatch. So in our case in Kansas, that means wheat and alfalfa for the most part. Now they'll eat anything. They'll lay eggs in the yards, and they'll eat just about any kind of vegetation. But agriculturally speaking, what we're worried about is alfalfa and wheat. Mainly wheat, because if it's a good stand of alfalfa, you can generally stand quite a bit of feeding by army cutworms. Wheat, not so much, especially this year because it's fall. It's it is really dry throughout most parts of the state. A lot of guys still haven't planted their wheat. They're still holding off in hopes of rain, or if they have, it hasn't germinated yet. So there could be some army cutworms, but the army worms are there. The army worms are pretty large. The question I get is whether there's going to be another generation of army worms so that they're there to feed on the wheat when it germinates. I really don't think so. We're mid-October. Generally, we're winding down as far as insect problems go in agriculture, but I wouldn't say that for sure. I think we're pretty much done with armyworm problems for the most part. Now, the other question I get, some guys are out, right now spraying the volunteer wheat with the herbicide, and they have armyworms in their volunteer wheat. And I've gotten several questions just recently about whether they should put an insecticide in with the herbicide to kill the armyworms. I don't really recommend that for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you're spraying your volunteer wheat, that's going to kill the wheat. So there's not going to be any food there for the armyworms or for anything else to feed on. That's the idea of spraying, getting rid of the volunteer wheat so that green bridge is not there, when your domestic wheat germinates. So I really don't think that's necessary to do that. And number two, if they're feeding on volunteer wheat, if it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks yet before your planted wheat germinates, they're going to be pupating and be gone anyway. So I just don't see any reason to use an insecticide with the herbicide when you're spraying volunteer wheat right now. I mean, you're killing the volunteer wheat. That's the purpose, because that way there's no food for any of the wheat pests. So I really discourage that or recommend that. I know some guys have done it, and that's fine. I just don't think it's necessary, and you're going to kill any beneficials that happen to be out there. Although this time of year, most of the beneficials are going into overwintering also. So that's not as big a concern as it is in the spring or other times. But still, I really discourage spraying an insecticide with the herbicide when you spray to get rid of your volunteer wheat.
And Jeff, one insect we have talked about and just want to give an update on where it's at, grasshoppers.
Grasshoppers. They never seem to go away. They are declining in populations, but I saw a couple of fields last week they were volunteer wheat fields, fortunately. Again, who cares if the grasshoppers feed on volunteer wheat? But they're getting ready to plant wheat, and they were no-till fields. So they were wondering if the grasshoppers are going to be there when the wheat germinates. Again, maybe, but the grasshoppers now are on the decline. They're a univoltine or a one-generation-a-year insect, so the ones that are out there are not feeding as much as they do in June, July, and August. They're adults or older adults. A lot of them are, just declining, going to die anyway. A lot of them are parasitized, so they don't feed that much, but they still cause concern. So, again, we have a lot of grasshoppers, but they're slowly dying out. And that brings up another question I received from a couple of co-ops. Should they use an insecticide seed treatment when they plant their wheat? You know what? A lot of people use insecticide-treated wheat seed around the state. I think I saw statistics like maybe 70% of the wheat in certain areas was treated with an insecticide. Now, I'm not talking a fungicide. It's a different story, but I'm talking insecticide. Insecticides on seeds of wheat really are not that necessary. I mean, if you're planting it in a patch or a field or someplace where you have Hessian fly or where you have a problem, maybe it might not be a bad idea. But really, our early season pests in wheat are not going to be that well controlled by seed treatments. I know I'm going to get some calls from companies, but we have the data to show that. They work. We just don't need them. They do well against. Actually, they do well against grasshoppers. They do well against Hessian fly, but we just don't need them at this time of year. They only last 3 to 4 weeks anyway, so you plant them now, and in the spring you get an infestation. That seed treatment's going to dissipate. It's not going to protect that wheat in the spring. So just keep that in mind. They work really well, but we just don't need them at this time.
Jeff, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime.
That was K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. The 2023 data for fluid milk sales has been released, and K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk looks at some trends and areas where producers might want to focus on.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning fluid milk sales during 2023. Central Order Milk Marketing Administrator has recently published the survey and summary of the 2023 milk sales across the United States, and I think it shows some interesting trends in our industry. As we look at milk sales, fluid milk sales over the past several decades, there's been many changes. As we look back to about 2010, those milk sales were pretty steady year to year. There was a little bit of up and down, but in general, the amount of milk that we marketed through fluid milk had stayed fairly steady. However, as we look at what's happened since 2010, there's been a dramatic decrease in the amount of milk that we're actually moving through fluid sales. In fact, compared to 2010, the numbers for 2023 would show a decrease of almost 28%. Very significant in our industry, and it's been a fairly steady decline year to year as we've looked at those sales. So as we look to the future of the dairy industry, if we're thinking it's going to be through fluid milk, we might want to think again about those thoughts and concentrate on some other things. In fact, as we look at all of the milk products out there, fluid milk products out there, in 2023, the only category to see an increase over 2022 was actually whole milk. and that was a fairly slight increase in that. If we compare numbers back to 1975 across the different types of fluid milk, we see now that whole milk is only 29% of the sales level it was in 1975. And as we're trying to look for bright spots in this report, lower fat milk is 102% of what it was in 1975. So essentially it's held its own. It did peak out a few years ago and has come back down. Other flavored milks are probably the way we see the greatest increase compared to 1975 at nearly 300% of what the 1975 sales levels were on a per capita basis. So as we look to the future of our dairy industry, what are some things that we might want to utilize this data for? Well, number one, as you think about what you're producing on your farm, if we're not going to be selling a lot of fluid milk, that means what we're actually going to be putting into the marketplace are things that are higher in content of the various milk components, particularly fat and protein, and maybe the highlight there should be protein. So as we think about how our milk checks are generated each month and the fact that we're getting paid for the pounds of protein and the pounds of fat that we're marketing, in addition to a few other things, but the majority of what we collect in our check is related to those two components. You need to be emphasizing that in your herd. So as you think about the percent crude protein in that milk going out the door every day, as well as the percent fat, you need to be taking that into consideration. This involves not only our breeding programs, but also our feeding programs and other management programs that we have. We need to strive for higher sales of solids off our farm. Yes, that may result in an increase in total milk being shipped off the farm, but many of the strides that we have made in recent years has actually been by increasing the level of milk components more so than the actual level of milk production. In fact, as you look across the United States in 2023, we actually saw very little change in the milk production per cow. However, solids continue to increase in our dairy herd across the United States. So, trends that you need to be aware of are the fact that you need to increase the amount of protein production as well as fat production coming off your farm. And a lot of that may come through the change in components rather than the increase in total milk that your herd is producing. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.